as the planet began to move away like a suction cup, it caused an electrical discharge, and that discharge ionized Venus, causing it to flip its poles and rotate backwards in a synchronous orbit with the Earth. The crater that you actually see, that lower edge of it, is the Himalayan mountain chain. We are talking about a massive impact crater. The Earth actually expanded and formed the oceans. That the oceans themselves are all formation events of the apocalypse. And he does a really nice job of showing how it really follows the Fibonacci sequence of Nautilus shell.
Introducing Robert Burke, better known on X as Dr. Stinky McDougall. He runs the YouTube channel, Dr. Stinky McDougall's Lab, exploring alternative history, catastrophism, and ancient planetary events. His flagship series, The Venus Apocalypse, examines cataclysmic Venus-Earth encounters through mythology, archaeology, geology, and cosmology, all delivered with sharp, irreverent humor and that challenges mainstream narratives. We love catastrophism here in the multiverse, and we were just talking about Gunung Padang because Megan does work there, and Robert was explaining to us a little bit about the electromagnetic, experience there. Megan, did you feel like a intuition boost while you were there?
Absolutely. I just in general, I felt a shift energetically, and I have some fancy equipment that sort of gives you a peek into your energetic body. And I'll tell you, it looks completely different on top of that pyramid than it does anywhere else I've tried it. And the rest of the places being pretty ordinary places. But even the difference from on top of the pyramid to in my homestay, steps from the bottom, totally different. Essentially the corona discharge, the photons coming from my fingertips were exploding so intensely anytime I'm up there that the machine can't even get a full read on my energetic body. It's too much for it. But I feel so calm and centered. So it's the opposite of what you would expect. And I am diving down this rabbit hole to find out what's going on here. So stay tuned for that.
Well, and it's interesting because the mythology story of stories of Indonesia, the story of the twin brothers. I'm sure you're familiar with mythology. Twin brothers, Sunda and Usunda. And they loved each other, and they would forever be invulnerable to anybody except one killing the other, which they said, of course, would never happen. Right? It becomes these two low bulb that created, and where you stood on the temple top is sitting at the heart of a magnetic field across, three ways there. It went to the right, it went to the left, and it went south. Right at that point where they put that structure. And from that state, you look at it and you can say, was it a pyramid or was it something else? The answer is pyramids take advantage of the field. Gunung Padang took advantage of the magnetic field. And so it is magnetic in nature and therefore not a pyramidal shape. It's a different type of shape meant to take advantage of the magnetic field in that region. Yeah. I love the conversation. I'd love to talk to you more about Gunung Padang.
Oh, we could have a whole day of chatting about that by the sounds of it.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to thank Bob for returning to the multiverse. We had a little snafu on our last try doing this, but I think it's going to be better this time because we've got Megan here. Bob's been doing more work. So Bob, thank you so much for joining the multiverse. I'd like to start with you just telling us a bit about yourself and how did Robert Burke become Dr. Stinky McDougall, and what first drew you into catastrophism and alternative views on planetary history?
Sure. I've always been inquisitive about what's going on, and I always sort of had this intuition that we're missing something. There's something not quite matching up here in terms of the data, and I began following. I believe it was a Sun Weatherman. I think it was Ben David, and Ben sort of led me to finding the Thunderbird project and the electric universe theory. So when I talk about catastrophism and I introduce my work, I want everyone to understand what I try to describe, and this is what I always try to describe is a repeat explanation for why we see the thing we see, and kind of the heart of what I do when doing my work. And when I was sharing some of my early work with friends of mine, you really seem to be onto something here. And so the reason we have to lab is I started a lab just as called the Venus Apocalypse. The name Dr. Stinky McDougall actually comes from race for governor here in the state of Wisconsin as the Libertarian candidate back in 2014.
Forgot about that.
Yeah, and so as after I'd done running, I had a fairly successful campaign event that occurred. A Koch brother funded group called America's Future Fund actually ran a huge Facebook ad on my behalf. They're called the Get Burke Blaze ads, and the Libertarian Party, for the purposes of legalization in the state, which won't have any legalization in the state, for that 1 week of the election, all of a sudden I hold the record in the state of Wisconsin as the largest independent expenditure by a third party for a third party candidate for governor. Nobody's ever used my editorials. But afterwards, I decided to take some of my political capital and just do a little advocacy on the UFO phenomenon. And because of some of my advocacy, the party became so apoplectic and dysfunctional. When I got on a Zoom call, I decided to change my name in protest because I was being pulled. They wanted naughty committee creations. It got nonsense. And so I thought Stinky McDougall would be a great name. And so the chair actually didn't start the meeting until I changed my name, and I refused to change my name. And so Stinky McDougall is a protest name. It's a political protest name for not having freedom to go advocate for the things that are important. And so here we are now, literally 10 years later. And what do you see in the news, right? Things like they're holding hearings in Congress. Tim Burke, if you saw what I saw, right? You have scientists disappearing 10 years ago to the Libertarian Party of Wisconsin. We need to be on the front side of disclosure. We need to be the ones having the conversation, so when they're looking for someone in politics who's not a fuck of the credibility of having talked about it 10 years ago.
This guy.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's supposed to be another hearing. I was going to say there's supposed to be another hearing on the 14th that we're not allowed to see. One of those ones we're not allowed to see.
What if history isn't linear? What if civilizations rise and fall again and again? Discover the shocking truth in Deja Vu, Has Everything Already Been? By my friend Alexander Cheshkovich. Grab your copy now on Amazon. The link is in the description below. And subscribe to Dave's Multiverse on YouTube, Spotify, and Rumble today so you don't miss a thing.
Yeah, so you're running for governor, and that's how Dr. Stinky McDougall got made. It's literally a protest, political protest name, which is badass. And here we are 12 years later, and disclosures happening as we speak. You were right. And
Well, that's one of the things I
not-
realize is, look, if you really want to make a difference, you got to be ahead of the curve. And
Exactly.
and that was sort of one of the things that got me into this. I was looking for something sciencey to kind of dig my fingers into that was different. And I came across the Thunderbolts project, and the Thunderbolts project made I think it was one of their documentaries that said Venus and the Earth have a synchronous orbit. And the only way for that to have occurred is for them to have been in close contact in antiquity. So let's just stop for a moment and let's ask ourselves the same question that I asked at that moment. Is that the only way for that to be true? Is there any way for these two planets to have a synchronous orbit as they began at virtually the same place in antiquity?
I can't think of another way. I can't think of another way off the top of my head.
Right.
They'd need to have been interacting with each other's gravity at some point.
They would have had to. It's like two pool balls. Once one hits the other one, you can trace the exact way one got to the other, right? There should be a logic to the literal degree of why they are where they are in relation to each other. And that's what we're saying when we say that the planet Earth have a synchronous, that in order for that to have occurred, they had to have been in close contact in antiquity. For every 13 times Venus goes around the sun, the Earth goes around 8 times. We call it the inferior conjunction. And at inferior conjunction, Venus does something very unusual in relation to the Earth. It goes into retrograde. It looks like it's going backwards from us. Opposite direction you would expect.
Aren't 13 and 8 both like goddess numbers as well? 13 and 8? And Venus is like the feminine. Yeah.
And Venus is the feminine, but yes, yeah. So when you look at the current planetary locations and their synchronous orbits, you can begin piecing together that at one point, it very much looks like many, if not all of the planets shared a moment of stability together before we find them in the positions they're at now. And so, once I started with that, I started asking myself, well, okay, some folks that had been into the field of catastrophism, like Meinbacher, had said, look, there are surface features that we can identify as being created by electrical forces. And so I gave you a slide stack there, Dave, and do you want to bring that up real quick, just to the very first slide? Because,
yeah, sure.
He was one of these guys, along with Andrew Hall, who said, are electrical shapes in the surface planet, and if you just identify what they are by their electrical characteristics, you can say a whole lot about what happened to that part of the planet electrically. And so I went around the Earth, started looking, for sources of electrical formations. This is in Death Valley, and as you can see on the little picture here on the left, these are clearly what are known as Lichtenberg figures. Lichtenberg figures are lightning bolt shapes. These weren't formed. These weren't formed by water. These shapes were formed by electricity.
Ooh.
Do we see the self-similar shape of electricity?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, actually. Wow.
Oh, the things the apocalypse that I talk about sculpt the entire surface of the planet. And there are stunning geographical formations all over the world once you look at them from an electrical standpoint, including areas of Australia that look like somebody dropped plasma balls that just evaporated the surface in those areas. I mean, yeah, there's incredible shapes around the world that are so much larger than we expect. For example, Australia is actually the center of a double lobe of energy that rotated. the actual
Ooh.
surface that's covered in that is much larger. But because electromagnetism is scalable, you can take these small effects and you can them all the way up to a large scale version. And the reason I started with this screen here from Death Valley, why don't you go ahead and head to the next slide for me? We're going to talk about a crater rim. We're going to talk about the nature of two rims that are actually of identical size. One is in the surface of Venus and one is in the surface of the Earth. And you get to look at these just like anybody else would. I mean, you can go on Google Earth and you can examine it for yourself. You can go pull up all of the pictures from the study of Venus by those current researchers. And when you do, if you just look, for example, at the structure I'm going to talk about on Venus called the Artemis Chasm, researchers of the planet Venus who have studied the Artemis Chasm and the larger structure overall have already come to the conclusion that Venus was hit by something. That side of the discussion is already extant. But if you go back one step and you ask yourself, if Venus had been hit by something and it happened after it created its synchronous orbit with the Earth, it would no longer have a synchronous orbit of the Earth. That means that it's likely that the thing Venus hit was the Earth. Do you see how we pulled this together?
Yeah.
Yes. And I want to say all these slides are going to be available in the description for anyone. So thank you so much, Robert, for that.
That's
Absolutely.
wonderful.
So why don't you go to the next slide real quick,
Okay.
because this is where we're going to look at the real meat and bones of these craters. So in 2013, there was a journal, and there was in this journal was the Journal of Meteoric and Planetary Science, and they published a paper on what a crater should look like, right? And they lay out in their abstract, because that's what you do, just the meat and bones of what you're talking about. And so what I do here for you in the next few slides is I'm going to take the very language of the abstract, and I'm going to show you how off to this right side here, the rim that you see, the crater that you actually see, that lower edge of it is the Himalayan mountain chain. We are talking about a massive impact crater. All right, let's go ahead and head to the next slide, because this will really kind of bring the whole idea together. The complete structure is actually what you would call a three-phase event. In phase one, Venus came to maximum impact of the planet. In phase two, which is in the middle, 3A, you had a neutral area. And as the planet began to move away like a suction cup, it caused an electrical discharge, and that discharge ionized Venus, causing it to flip its poles and rotate backwards in a synchronous orbit with the Earth. So this kind of takes you from one side to the other of the apocalypse. And when you use the language directly out of the abstract, it states there are 6 primary structures. The incoming approach along the horizontal plane is what we see with number 1 in this long arched curve. That curve and the surface burn, when we say ionization, just think heat. It got so hot going down, they started burning up. Ionization is the burning of the surface. The greater the ionization, the greater the desertification of the surface.
Okay.
Is the primary crater rim, right? That's the rim of the Himalayan mountain chain. The secondary skipping crater is in the middle. And at the very end, you have a blowout ejecta. Using the actual language of a peer-reviewed study, we can see all the primary parts of an impact with the Earth, including my favorite, which is number 4. Would you go to the next slide for me?
Yeah. May I ask quick, Venus is the only planet with a synchronous orbit with Earth, correct?
There are other planets that have a synchronous orbit, but in a moment we'll get to the way that we can finally denote that these two go together. But there is a synchronous orbit with Mars, and then there are several planets that have synchronous orbit selves as well. I have not continued to go out. There's just so much meat on the bone where I'm at. I haven't really looked at all of the synchronous orbits, but we can also look at the rotational arc as well in order to put some of this together. So on the next slide.
I want to make sure I understand this.
Please.
Can you visualize, like, describe this in visual terms for me? Like I know you just did, but the Venus connects with Earth at the top of this arrow on one.
Correct.
And
that
then,
is the incoming approach of Venus, which appears to have come from the north based on the desertification. When these two bodies come together, you had heat created from the friction between the two magnetospheres. And that friction created heat that we would otherwise call in electrical terms surface ionization. It created a desertified surface, which is why you have the desert of the Eurasian plateau. These were caused by the literal fire heating of the surface.
Okay. And then take me to 2A and then 3A, and then like it blew out.
Well, just like throwing a ball, or if you've ever played golf, right? When the ball comes in, there's a maximum angle of impact. And that maximum angle of impact in the surface of the Earth is what formed, in part, the Himalayan mountain chain. The Himalayan mountain chain represents a perfect arc of electromagnetic forces between Venus and the Earth. And in fact, it's my theory that the mountain of the Himalayan mountains are actually formed from material that was pulled down electromagnetically from the surface of Venus. And that Venus had shallow oceans, which is why there are fish and seashells on the top of the Himalayan mountain chains. How do you get seashells on top of the mountain? The material from the mountain came from the planet above it.
So they would be like shells and fish from Venus?
Yes.
I gotta get up there and find
How is
some
this
shells.
not the coolest idea you've ever heard, right?
I will know this.
It is a cool idea. So the 3A primary ejecta field, tell me about that. What did that look like?
Just like a golf ball hitting a divot on the green, sometimes the surface area will be pulled up. Because the event was electromagnetic in nature, there is an ejection zone in front of the impact crater where the electromagnetic plasma lines, like you would see in fact, not just kind of like, exactly like you would find in the auroras, a field of electromagnetic plasma channeled the rubble out in front of the impact itself, creating neutrality between the two. Once the final impact stopped, once it stopped creating pressure on the Earth, you can imagine there was like a switch, right? And if you've ever heard a switch go click, that click literally did an electrical discharge from the center of the Earth in a single sealed pulse north, captured by mythology globally as the lightning bolt of Zeus. And in that discharge, it ionized the planet Venus, giving it the extra pull away. That was what actually created all of the pressure and why Venus has such a very high pressure atmosphere. All of the pressure from the impact was reapplied to the planet in the discharge.
Okay.
Interesting.
And in mythology, right now, what's the most known story, that crack that I'm talking about, is called the Red Sea. What is the most famous story about the Red Sea?
Noah parting it.
What if Noah parted the short way? What if Noah represents the flow of electromagnetism within the event, eventually parting and ending the circonnection?
Ooh.
Interesting.
Whoa.
Freeing the Jews. What does that mean, and how does this encoding look, right? And that's kind of one of the things about my work that differentiates it from other people's work. What I am trying to explain is that our mythology, our legends, our religion, in many ways, capture the cycle of this event occurring and are designed to memorialize it for us because it was so important. And I have several slides later on that we can talk about that look into the mythology of the event itself.
Perfect.
I think it's important to start. What do you guys think? I mean, you see a crater?
Yeah, I see the whole thing. I see exactly what you're describing. I wanted to know why does this skipping discharge and this secondary blowout 2B and 3B, why do they go at 90 degrees all of a sudden?
Well, that's how electromagnetism sets up. Everything happens at right angles. Yeah, I mean, there's other angles within electromagnetism, but if we're moving from a magnetic event into an electrical event, so the magnetic event is the circle, very beginning where number 4 is found. Mm-hmm. That was a magnetic event. That was the electrical charge of the Earth pushing up, stop the approach of Venus. It's, when you really watch my videos, you'll often hear me say that this represents the near impact crater. That's really the correct way to say it, is because, one, nothing ever touches. Nothing. And in this case, that included the planet Venus and Earth. They never actually touched. They exchanged electromagnetic energy between the two of their magnetospheres. But the reason that Venus doesn't, just like magnets, but when the polarity changed, when the Earth went from being the cathode to being the discharging anode, when that polarity changed from having a magnetic propulsion event to an electrical discharge event. Got it. Those occur at 90 degrees to each other.
Got it. Okay. I was just trying to visualize the slide a little bit better in my hominid brain here. All right, we can move on to the next one. So what are we looking at?
This is probably my favorite part of the entire story. When we talk about there being an electromagnetic event, that means that you had to have had an anode and you had to have had a cathode. And if that's the case, then somewhere along the way, you should be able to identify the direction that the current was flowing. Remember, we're talking about electrical models here. In the very center of the crater, you have what's called the Tarim Basin, okay? They have discovered and published a paper that says that there is a 46-degree rotation, clockwise rotation, in the middle of the centralized scar of the near impact crater. And that's because that Tarim Basin burn represents the direct exchange of current. And if you apply Maxwell's rules, Maxwell was a famous scientist of electromagnetism. Maxwell says that if you take your thumb and you point it in the direction of the current, you can find the rotation of the magnetic field. And this is how you would get the magnetic field to go clockwise. This means the current was flowing into the crust of the Earth at this location during the apocalypse. Again, the question is, do we have enough evidence that says something happened? And do we have enough scientific evidence sorted by, peer-reviewed papers. I'm not the guy that found the rotation in the crust. I'm just telling you that they call it a thrust rotation for a reason. The crust was thrust into a rotation by the induced magnetic field where the current entered the Earth between the bodies.
Huh. So do they, in this paper, how do they explain it?
Billions of years.
Obviously, it's always billions of years of geology.
Billions of years. And so the answer is no, it didn't happen over billions of years or even millions of years. The rotation happened in a very short period of time, perhaps less than an hour during the apocalypse discharge, probably. Right? And so
well, a lot of this looks violent, you know. It looks violent to me, not slow. Right?
Right. Look at the evidence. I mean, if you consider just where this impact occurred, you have to imagine that this created incredible displacement between the two. If there had been, you know, sort of Megan, to your point earlier, right, advanced civilization, I'm still trying to get my hands around that. But what I can define is that if this is an impact crater, we certainly had one culture that developed on one side of this crater, and a culture that was completely different that developed on the other side of this crater for a very long time before they began intermixing. Right?
Okay.
Is that not how it feels?
That's how it looks, looking at this. What I'm asking myself right now is, then if this is, and we're going to get into this, but if this is talked about in mythology, then there must have been, humans like us trying to describe it in some way, right? And so
it's our most popular, one of the oldest characters in history. It's the story of Zeus. Most of the stories that you hear about Zeus, with the exception of certain origin stories like the origin of Athena, the story of Zeus saving the earth, saving Athena from Medusa, is the story of the apocalypse. Medusa is all recognized as the planet Venus, and Athena is, for the most part, already recognized as the planet Earth. And if we look at Zeus as the sky father, which became known in several different languages before Zeus became popularized, we're looking at stories that are telling you the same event, but with different constructs. Sometimes Pallas is a man, or Venus is a man called Pallas, or a male god. Sometimes Venus is feminine, such as being the story of Medusa, right? In some stories, she's a young lady named Pallas who grew up with Venus, who was accidentally stabbed by Athena with a spear. But in every case, in every story, Pallas dies. Medusa dies, right? Minerva dies. All of these mythology are teaching us that there was an event encoded into our mythology.
Very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
In fact, the story of this site itself has to do, I think it's the next slide, actually, if you wanted to head one more slide.
Yeah, let's go.
This is just another example. You can look at these from, any different side that you want to look at. I tell people, look, if you've ever played golf, does this not look like a golf ball bit? Right? We're looking for something that we know that we can repeat that has the characteristics we already recognize. Next slide. So in mythology, one of the things that we look at are these petroglyphs that are found around the world. And a perfect example of Jacob's wheel is found etched into stone. And it is likely that it represents this round rotating negative charge that they would have seen above them at the planet, between the to rotating. This would have been one of the, the head, if you will, as I'm showing here, of the discharge. Okay. The slide that I'm really looking for is one more forward.
Yeah, that's a cool mythology. That's a cool one in the top right, though. Where's that from, real quick? I think you said it earlier.
Project video, but the cell was originally studied by an electrical engineer by the name of Dr. Anthony Peratt. And Dr. Peratt published in the IEEE, it's an electrical engineering journal, that petroglyphs that are found around the globe actually represent plasma forms that he had actually created in a lab. So he had studied plasma at, different levels of all that you might want to look at. And he was actually contacted by a researcher of these petroglyphs found around the world. And they said, hey, I need you to come look at these because you're leading scientists in the plasma field. And we think that we have plasma forms etched in stone. And Dr. Peratt came back and actually said, yeah, these are what are known as squatter man. And this one is a separate image from squatter man. But the squatter man form seems to have been etched as a recognition that they saw plasma in the sky at some point in history.
Right. Okay. And Dr. Robert Schoch attributes that to a solar outburst. But yeah, interesting.
Well, and we can look at it as being from a solar discharge, but it would be one thing for them to etch in the sun, right? But if there were a plasma stability running from the sun to the earth, if that would be the implication, these would be connected images, the stability would have to be, immensely large. And I'm not sure how you would see that from any scope if it was the sun. But if this form itself looks like a wheel, right, then I think we have to ask ourselves, do we see the sun acting like a wheel at any other time? And the answer is no. We don't see it, rotating like this in front of us. But if we look at this shape as a wheel in the sky just above us, it may add some context to Jacob's wheel and to the uses of wheels in several other mythologies. And the reason there's a wheel is because, as you see on this slide, right, what we're talking about Zeus, which is a plasma stability forming between two planetary bodies in antiquity. That this is the origin of the sky father. And I've asked myself, is it possible that there are other examples of plasma stabilities in the sky at this time? And the answer is there very well could be. There are several different types of shapes that look like a man that have been etched into petroglyphs around the world. But in terms of the most highly formed image, which is this squatter, this is a very specific image. It's always facing directly upright. It always has the two round globes around it, left and right. And so it seems to me that what we're really looking at is we're looking at the origin of Zeus. And when we do this, there's an interesting part to the story of the Medusa and Zeus tale, which is that Zeus sent his son Perseus to save Athena. The arrow would then point the direction of current. Zeus was pointing Perseus at the earth. Per Zeus, the current flowed from Venus to the earth. And these are just ways to take the language of the ancients and directly attribute it to an event in antiquity.
Very interesting. So when exactly do you think that this happened in historical timelines?
Because we have synchronous orbits, we can actually probably calculate an extremely good estimate. But, I find it interesting that Jewish tradition says that we're in like the 5700th year. The Chinese put us somewhere in the late 48, I think it's 47 or 4800, years ago. I don't have a favorite date, but I think both of these are very valid descriptions of what we might start talking about as the beginning of time, beginning of what we might definitionally say creation in, historic tradition. Now, some people say, are you saying there's actually a moment where time became real? And the answer is, I don't have any other way to explain why they would suddenly be counting years and saying, in the year of our Lord, right? Why else would you say in the year of our Lord if you were not now talking about a definition of a time frame different than the one previously?
Yeah, so the one previously, the Earth probably looked a lot different, obviously. There was hominids, or there was humans like us, kind of, but wouldn't the gravity have been different and things like that? So the humans could have been much different, like bigger or smaller?
Well, and that's an interesting point. One of the things in my research that I've found is that there are actually several really great researchers out there on different subjects that directly relate to catastrophism. And one of them, and I'll have a slide later, but we can talk about it now. One is a gentleman that goes by the name of the Fractal Earth Project, the Fractal Earth. And he has put out several videos defining the expansion of the Earth's crust. The way that the expansion has occurred and the way he illustrates it suggests that it had to have occurred in a single episode, which is what I would argue was the apocalypse. Venus is 95% the size of the Earth. And that means that the Earth must have expanded until it was just 5% larger than Venus, meaning it had enough mass to push Venus off.
Huh.
And there's a real great researcher, his name's Ted Holden. Ted has even suggested this. Ted has said, look, if you take the strongest man on Earth today, you take the largest animal that we have on record alive today, which is the elephant in the Smithsonian, in Chicago, right? There's no way to create muscle mass larger than that in today's gravitational pull. In order for dinosaurs to have existed on Earth, the Earth had to have had a lower mass.
That's what I was getting at. Yeah.
It had a lower electrical potential. And so suddenly we have a definition for the size of a creature in relation to the electrical potential of the Earth. That the lower the electrical potential, the larger the animal itself. The lower electrical potential, the lower what we might call gravity. Right? And that because we look around today, we know, like you hear these things about Jurassic Park. Look, Jurassic Park was great storytelling. It's complete fiction. If anybody tried to resurrect a brontosaurus today, it would collapse under its own weight. The blood pressure required to pump blood up the neck of a giraffe is so intense that in order to do a brontosaurus, I mean, the brontosaurus's neck is magnitudes larger than a giraffe's. Are you trying to tell me that there is a structure of biology that would contain that much blood pressure required? And the answer is no. It's just not feasible. The Earth must have been smaller.
My understanding is that it has something to do with the amount of oxygen as well, that there was more oxygen available at the time of the dinosaurs.
Well, it can still be an environment with a greater degree of oxygen. And I don't think that that's necessarily a false statement. It probably is true that we had a much higher and a much more oxygen-rich environment. And I think that, when some of these amber cores that they have, I believe that they've, found higher concentrations of oxygen. None of that over the point that you still have to deliver the blood flow against gravity, or what we perceive as gravity.
Interesting.
Yeah, and it's just not possible. There's just absolutely no way you can pump that much blood up the neck and not burst the veins. You'd have to have either a different type of vein that we don't know about, right? Or you'd have to have a lower gravity for them to operate in. Yeah.
Very
And so the
interesting.
apocalypse was a lot of things. And to your question, Dave, right? What sort of life forms were here on Earth, right?
Yeah.
What sort of an environment existed? Was this the environment of the woolly mammoth, or did the woolly mammoth fall from the planet Venus onto the planet Earth? I don't know the answer to these questions, but it was pointed out to me, and it's you actually go to the website for the Grand Canyon. It's true, Nora, and none of the megafauna, none of their biology, none of their bones, none of their imprints have ever been found in the Grand Canyon. It's like there was a dividing point. There was a world where they existed, and then the Grand Canyon was formed, and they had never visited the Grand Canyon.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Yeah. And I'm just trying to wrap my brain around Venus colliding with Earth. It must have been like whatever happened before that put Venus in an eventual impact rotation with Earth that must have took a long time, right? And it was like something you could almost see coming over a long period of time, right?
So one of the things that my research has led me to the conclusion of, I have no other way to come to this conclusion, is that the current, what's known as the nebular helix model of the solar system formation, that formation model is complete nonsense. The idea that things rotated around a proto-sun and that, excuse me, and that clumps of dust clumped together as they rotated around the sun, this model doesn't work. No one has ever been able to replicate it. There is no mathematical model to support it. They are teaching it in school, and it is completely unfounded. In the electric universe model, the idea is that there are these long strands called Birkeland current that run between the stars, that run between the galaxies. And that along the Birkeland current, a Z-pinch occurred, and that Z-pinch is the origin of the system. And it is then the theory, several electric universe theories, that all of the planets then formed along the Birkeland current, both north and south of the Z-pinch. It is my theory that if you go from the sun south, we can with some certainty align the planets as so sorry, I'm getting colder. You can align things as the sun, probably Mercury, definitely Venus, the Earth, Mars, and Saturn. That you can align these 5 planetary bodies along the Birkeland current during the formation of the solar system. And by doing that, we then can begin a cycle of planetary formation as a discharge by these sun bodies. And in fact, when we look at where we are here, why is Venus coming down on top of the Earth? The answer is they formed in a line directly on top of each other. Eventually, they fell into each other, discharged into the helical model that we see today. And that discharge is what stopped the north-south and caused us to move into a helical rotating model around the sun. It is the collapse that we call the gigantomachy, the collapse of the giant machine. Maki simply means machine. The giant machine, which was the alignment of all the planets along the Birkeland current, into the current helical model. Theory has as much structure and as much likelihood as the nebular model, with one exceptional benefit, which is that much of what I describe is actually, once again, written down in mythology, right? We can define how the solar system formed, because just like the stories about the apocalypse in ancient mythology, They wrote all of the origin stories for us as well. They told us how Athena was formed. They told us how Venus was formed. They told us how Mars was formed. And by utilizing that mythology and the evidence of the apocalypse, this formation along the string with these planetary bodies and the sun is about as close as I come to a proto-solar system formation origin. And it's from that we get the really key point. Why did it collapse? And the answer is found once again in the story of Medusa. Medusa was a beautiful princess living in the temple of Athena. Where is that? Temples are above. They're in the head, right? Venus was above us. In the story, Venus is raped by Neptune. She's raped by a god. She's raped by, Poseidon also. You know, some people say Poseidon. The POS of Poseidon represents a positive charge. She became positively charged. She was larger than the earth, and her positive pressure, she was raped by Poseidon, caused her to fall. And that fall is what created the Medusa with the flaming magnetic field outside of it. All of the mythology describing things falling down. That's exactly what the mythology tells us.
Interesting. Okay.
Do you want to have?
Yes, please. Let's do it.
So, because the event was electrical, one of the things that we can do is we can apply electrical diagrams to these craters. And the reason that we have a crater rim that runs from the Himalayan mountain chain is because electrically at the bottom of the plasma stability, the material manifests on the surface of the earth as a positive charge. If you look at the shape of the Himalayan mountain chains, you'll go in really tight, you will see these fuzzy lightning bolts that are built up. When a lightning bolt formation creates a mountain, it is a positive charge. When it creates a river, it is a positive discharge. The Himalayan mountain chains are positive incoming charge, and that charge happens between the pincer, the electromagnetic field. If you go to the next slide, you'll see the exact opposite occurred on Venus. Rather than it being between the pincers, this one is the pincers. And I actually emailed A. Hall, who's another well-known catastrophist. He's my hero because he's so good. I said, Andy, on Venus, you have he calls it his crooked smile. It's called the keystone pattern. I said, Andy, there's a keystone pattern. There's a crooked smile on the planet Venus as well. I just got to know. Why is the Artemis chasm in the shape of such a perfect C? And he explained caused by the electromagnetic pinch of the event. The more intense and the longer the event goes, the more defined the C shape will become. And that is exactly what we see in the surface of the planet of Venus. Not only that, but the Artemis chasm, which is a chasm over a mile deep. If you're wondering where would the material come to cover the earth and make the Himalayan mountains, it came from the surface of Venus. It left a trench opposite the Himalayan mountain chain. It left a trench over a mile wide, 1,600 miles across. If you were to arc the entire Himalayan mountain chain, it would be 1,600 miles across. Stinky, how do we know that this is where the apocalypse occurred? Because they've both got identical craters. One is in negative relief and one is in positive relief.
Whoa. One
was the anode, which gave up material, and one was the cathode, which received the material. And in mythology, it is said over and over and over in different stories of Athena. Athena wears the skin of her victims. Say it again. Athena wears the skin of her victims. The
Huh.
Himalayan mountain chain represents the skin of her victims. Even more so than that, it says that Athena wears the face of Medusa on her crown, on her shield. The shield is literally the basin of the Himalayan mountain chain, and the Taran Basin, the near impact site on Earth, is the literal shield location of Athena's shield. She wears the face of Medusa on her shield.
Whoa.
So
And so when I point to why the Venus apocalypse theory is, one, it might be some people to connect to. It's because it's actually supported by scientific analysis. It's supported by not a brand new set of science. It's supported by the science of electromagnetism. I have two identical scars. I have one in negative relief, one in positive relief. I have an anode. I have a cathode. I have a definition of ionization, and I can tell you how the chasm and the mountains were formed.
Whoa. This is some pretty cool stuff.
it's a big picture thing that I like to try to keep myself in a big picture, but this is like a big picture. And
well,
so
what's unique about this is that it allows you to stop for a moment and put a pin in time. You can literally put a pin in time and say, this happened. And so when you find things like the graves that were discovered in the Taran Basin, were the graves before the apocalypse or the apocalypse? Clearly after the apocalypse. And so once we date the apocalypse, then we can say, is the date we give these mummies, is this newer or older than what we would expect to find? And it has to be inside of it. It couldn't have survived the apocalypse. And so it allows us to kind of create a set point in time from which to judge additional evidence. Do you want to go ahead to the next slide for me?
Absolutely. Whoa.
So this is the entire surface of Venus. And, as I said early on, when I first came across the research information of the Artemis Chasm and the primary researchers, one of which, by the way, is a professor at the University of Minnesota, Duluth. So she's only about 2 hours away from me, but she didn't respond to my theory. But this is fine. But they have already, upon looking at a larger structure and better data, they have already determined that the Artemis Chasm and the larger structure around it represent a bolide impact crater. They have already determined that this is an impact. There is no need for you or I to argue or debate about this. The only question is, what hit it, or more importantly, what did it hit? And in order to answer the question, that question, what hit it or what did it hit, is to ask yourself, what is the anode and what is the cathode? And the cathode is the ground in a circuit. And that means that if Venus hit the Earth and bounced off the ground, that would mean that the Earth was the cathode and Venus was the anode. These are how we can, additionally divide these different bodies. But it's also how we can say that this hit the Earth. The Earth was the ground. It was the solid part of the circuit. So I talked earlier about the Fractal Earth YouTube channel, and you really should please stick it down in the comments in the description section here as well. But Sean McPherson is a medical imaging specialist from Australia, and he reached out to me after he had noticed the fractal representation of the Earth. Because he used to looking at things in a medical imaging fashion where you have everything's got a mirror, right? The body left and right is very similar. He realized there were these fractal expressions across the surface of the Earth. And he had already noted them when he came across my work, but my work helped him to identify a key fractal of the Earth, which is the Himalayan mountain chain itself. And so this picture that he gives you is the example that you can see that where you have the Himalayan mountain chains on the left, on the right, you have the Japanese archipelago, right?
Mm-hmm.
That these are not just sort of similar. They formed as diametrically opposed. If you note in cathode equalization points, right, a positive and negative polarity on this segment of the Earth during the apocalypse. And that's what he's really illustrating here for us so beautifully, is that how we know this event was larger than just the Tarim Basin. This didn't just affect the Tarim Basin. We can now say, based on his model, that this impacted and affected the surface formation of an area as large as the Japanese islands. But when you get into his work overall, what you see is that the Earth actually expanded and formed the oceans. That the oceans themselves are all formation events of the apocalypse. This is where the fundamental expansion of the crust occurred. First, off of the coast of Africa, and second, forming the Indian Ocean. And he does a really nice job of showing how it really follows the Fibonacci sequence of the Nautilus shell itself. That in order for something to occur like that, it would have to have a structure. And what he's pointing to is that there are natural structures in reality around us that are larger than just the Nautilus shell. That all things that will expand along this exact same geometric shape. He also then shows the expansion of the Pacific Ocean. And the Pacific Ocean gives you an example of why this was an electrical event. All of the islands in the Pacific Ocean are formed within a triangle. And that triangle is called the Polynesian Triangle of volcanic islands. They formed as an electrical grounding during the apocalypse. But it was an expansion that created the islands. The Pacific Ocean didn't exist prior to the apocalypse. It's incredible, but true. That's why it has its own crust. That's why you have the Ring of Fire. The Ring of Fire represents the outer rim to the crustal expansion in the center.
Whoa.
Ring of fire, the ring of fire.
Yep, right?
Yeah, that's what that makes me think of. Yeah, you can see the fractal pattern for sure.
And so, Megan, if we're looking down at Indonesia, you can see now on the fractal Earth where he is showing you this arc that forms the Indonesian archipelago, right?
Yeah.
That arc is very specifically where it is in a bulb of electromagnetism. It is in a very specific place of magnetism lighting up and expanding the crust. And Gunung Padang is there because of that arc and because of its structural position as a bulb of magnetism.
It's definitely on a geomagnetic anomaly zone, so that checks. Does that have something to do with
if we knew why that geomagnetic anomaly existed?
There we go, right? And does this have to do with all like the earthquakes and everything happening along there also?
It does.
Volcanoes.
The bulb sits like this. It sits like this at an angle to the left. And in what was the big Indonesian in 2011, when the big earthquake occurred, it occurred because that bulb became polarized and the magnetic field shifted suddenly, and that sudden shift created a wave. All earthquakes are caused by an equalization between two electrical plates. And it was right after the solstice, right? Right after the solstice. And not only that, but there had been a very active period of energy stored up within that bulb And it just,
Wow.
it, like an engine turning over, like, boom. That's literally what happened is you had a rotation of the energy.
Right.
Cool. Cool.
Excuse me.
Make a little.
Yeah, you can see how it's just like right, it's hanging out right in that curve there. And that would be a point where things are coming together.
Exactly. And so suddenly we find that a set of electromagnetism in the crust of the earth is affecting our day-to-day life. And once we know that these things are there, once we identify that they exist and are impacting our planet, we can begin to use predictive models around the energy excuse me, that might get stored up in these things.
Absolutely. Well, that would be handy for humanity. Definitely give us a bit of a leg up.
That's exactly what
we
you
saw
guys
this-
were talking about at the beginning too,
Yeah.
with getting Padang. So
And, and we can actually see the same thing. I did a video, I think it's 26, but I did a video on the Honga Tonga volcanic explosion back in 2023. But if you you can see it on the map here a little bit, but where these lines are in connection, the Honga Tonga volcano follows one of these lines. And what had occurred is that the day of the eruption, a solar flare hit the earth, and that solar flare pressed energy into the crust of the earth during the day. And by doing that, a high pressure electrical event that as soon as sunset comes across the earth, the pressure releases, and that's what causes the volcano to erupt. The volcano didn't erupt because there was pressure below. The volcano erupted because it was pulled as the pressure released from above. It was sucked into the air. And that's what caused the Honga Tonga to explode, is location, global electrical circuit, and its storage and eventual release of the electromagnetic energy from the CME.
Whoa, interesting.
yeah, very.
Again, once we understand the nature of catastrophism, we understand the nature of the circuit in the earth, we can answer all sorts of questions. In fact, a number of them have to do with megalithic sites. Do you want to go ahead to the next screen?
I love talking about
Absolutely.
sites.
Did it switch for you?
So, yep.
Okay, good.
So what I'm going to talk about here, we're going to go through three slides fairly quickly, but what I want to talk about here is the importance of being able to identify shapes of electromagnetism based on self-similarity. And so these are examples of both positive and negative electrical charge. And you see that you have, one is like a ball of yarn and one is like a prickly sea urchin. Those are your two primary differences between a negative and a positive charge. This website here called Stone Ridge Engineering, go ahead to the next slide. These guys did this really great image of the difference, the similarities of an electromagnetic field of electricity bring not only the bronchial tubes of the chest, right? That's a lung on the right, but that also electrical discharges must have also formed the surface of the earth. And you can see that with these dendritic, what they call Lichtenberg figures. The universe is electric. And so what should your lungs look like? My lungs should look electric.
Wow.
The earth was formed in a creation event, and if the universe is electric, we should see electromations in the surface of the earth. These are their findings. This isn't my finding. This is their finding. But if you go to the next slide, the fact of the matter is, science only works if it's repeatable. Right? This is a very popular form of artwork known as electrical discharge arcing. And it creates these
Cool.
electrical Lichtenberg figures into the surface of the wood. I don't know if you're going to see it here, but I have a cone behind me here, my cajon, and it's, I'll bring it down a little bit. There you go. Right, my cajon has these electrical Lichtenberg figures burned into it.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and the reason that I
cool.
did that, the reason I chose it, in part, was because what you're seeing right here on this piece of wood is not sort of how the Mississippi River was formed. It is not sort of how the Rhone was formed. It is not sort of how the Amazon was formed. This is the exact same formation as those rivers.
Whoa.
This is the exact scientific way that these rivers were formed. They were formed in a positive electrical discharge.
Huh.
Cool.
This is called ripple science. This is a model that you can take to the bank. This is what happened. And when we do that, we'll look at these things with a scientific eye, with repeatable electrical signatures. Go ahead to the next slide.
I want to do this type of art.
Yeah, same.
Oh, cool.
I was thinking about that myself.
Yeah.
I know, right? It's really cool. So when we do that, when we apply these known patterns, suddenly things like the Mississippi River drainage basin become very apparent. You know, we can begin to identify that there are self-similar structures here, and that the Mississippi River basin was likely formed. Excuse me. My apologies. Likely formed in electrical discharge.
Wow.
I am not offering you anything but physical evidence. So back on the rivers. So one of the really cool things then is if you look at the major river systems of the world, right? You can suddenly distinguish a very unique characteristic about the four primary rivers of the world. The Mississippi River starts in the south and goes north. The Yangtze River starts in the west and goes east. The Amazon River starts in the east and goes west. And the Nile starts in the south and goes north. You suddenly realize that you're looking at four primary rivers that move in four different directions. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
Very.
Why did the river form? The river formed as part of an overall equalization. There has to be one of everything. Yeah. So do you want to go ahead to the next slide for me?
Of course. What is that image on the right, on the left? Sorry, if you explained it already,
sure.
I apologize.
So there are several different ways to do the etching. So the wood etching that you saw is, a direct current application. This is done in plexiglass. What they do is they create a highly charged surface in the glass, and then they.
Uh-oh. Are you there, Megan?
I'm here.
Whoops, there we go.
Oh, that's for a second there.
Yeah, that was weird. So what they do is they do it in a pack, and then what they do with it is they do a piece of plexiglass, they highly charge it, and then they take a nail and they tap it with the nail, and the nail discharges through the plexiglass and forms that Lichtenberg pattern that you see there. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, those happen instantly, unlike the wood burning ones. Those take a little more time.
Wow, very cool. I just was curious how that was made.
Yeah, there's all sorts of Lichtenberg artwork out there. It's really kind of neat what they're doing with it these days.
You're speaking our language here, Robert. We love Mars.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to speak the language, and then I'm also maybe going to upset a little bit of the apple cart, because much like the Earth, right? The entire surface of the planet of the Earth was changed in the apocalypse, And the fact of the matter is that Mars itself, as being part of the Gigantomachy, as being part of, several of the mythologies, Mars also underwent its own transformation during the apocalypse as well. So when we address the question of was there an advanced civilization on Mars, I don't know. The surface of the planet was so altered that I'm not willing to put my foot down and say yes or no. But what I will tell you is that there are several things about the planet that, if we look at it more holistically, if we look at it once again from an electrical standpoint, right, that many of the arguments that are being made for this advanced civilization are people really pointing at what are otherwise electrical characteristics left in the surface of the planet due to the apocalypse itself, right? And in the first of the 3 videos I did in my series on Mars, I did the face of Mars. And this object has, captured people's attention for quite some time. When I looked at it, however, and I looked at the shapes and the discharges and the different pictures, and I said, what does this most likely represent? It really most likely represents a positive electrical discharge. And I was able to find examples of electromagnetism and the fields as they would express in, the surface. And that's the diagram that I have here with the 2 pluses. This is essentially how this would be like having a double toroid tornado, right? You've had 2 positive vortexes coming down. And if you had that, this is the shape that you would get in the surface of the Earth. And I think there's a good argument for this being a self-similar shape to this diagram. And not only that, but in the lower right-hand corner, there are glow discharge shapes of a discharge in electromagnetism that are very well known, that are very well studied. And the shape across the entire surface itself seems to actually match the chart of an electrical discharge arc. And I mean, this isn't me. That I'm presenting to you what I see as self-similar shapes. And this seemed to really, scream to me that this was formed in electrical discharge. I don't know what was here previously to this, but there's enough sand and enough electrical arcing going on here for me to say that this whole structure is likely formed by an electrical discharge.
I was kind of hoping it was like a face on Mars that aliens put there.
Again, I'm not saying that we aren't going to find things there. But if you ask me, look, again, much like the entire surface of the Earth being changed in the apocalypse, there is not a square inch of Mars that was not changed in the apocalypse. And one of the things I point to is that these round electrical discharge holes from the apocalypse, there are discharge pockets like that in the area, less than a mile away. Why would we assume if there's an electrical discharge pock mark on the surface in Venus a mile away, why would we assume that this is untouched?
Right.
And it
Now,
looks
my
like
second video. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it looks like there's been some changes from 1998 to 2001, and you think this is electrically related?
No, I was using these as examples. So there are 3 primary photos of this object, and these are the 3 primary ones. And one of the things about the 1998 is that the 1991 was taken from more of a side view instead of being directly overhead. And because of that side view, it allows us to see that top plus signs central discharge crater. There are not 2 separate eyes there. There is a single crater in the middle. That's what the 1998 image is showing us. And to deny that is to play is to play selective with the facts. You can't dismiss just this picture, which clearly shows a central crater to the structure. And I can show you an electrical reason for that crater being there.
I'm in. Let's see it.
Well, it's the diagram that I've included, right? The diagram itself represents an incoming positive charge. And this positive charge came around at ground. Positive goes to negative. And so positive goes to negative. The negative is always the ground. This is a positive vortex, two of them coming down directly over the site. And if they did this in an electrical lab, this square formation with two holes is what you would find. And it's my argument that is exactly what we find when we look at the face on Mars. We find two holes, and we find a triangular object.
And then our pareidolia kicks in and says, it's a face on Mars.
The shape of the human face is electrical. There is a reason you see a face in it. The face is electrical.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, everything is light.
Everything is light. Light is electrical.
Exactly.
Tom DeLonge said this in an interview once. He said that all matter around us is frozen light.
All matter around us is frozen light.
Okay.
Yeah, from a star. Yeah. So what we're looking at here is the second one, which the question of, are there pyramids on Mars, right?
We like to talk about this too.
Yeah. And once again, when we look at the idea of an apocalypse shaping the surface of the planet, what ourselves is, are there electrical reasons for these items to form? And a pyramidal shape is actually just the base structure for electromagnetism. When an electrical current hits the ground, it's going to ground in a very specific way, and that way is generally as a triangle. But when you have a high enough structure to the electricity, you will have four triangles that will structure into a square. And that square is what forms naturally mountains that look like triangles, that look like pyramids. It's a natural structural grounding formation which defines that an electrical current structurally hit the ground, which formed, as electricity will, in the shape of a triangle. The reason you have a crater next to this is because the crater represents the second phase. So you remember that I talked about there being an impact phase, a neutral phase, and a discharge phase? There were three phases for each planet. The pyramid represents the charge phase, an electromagnetic connection of energy being forced into the Earth, well, into Mars. But at a certain point, the polarity reversed, and that caused a negative electrical discharge to occur next to what we would consider the pyramid itself. And so both of these structures are natural creations formed in the apocalypse on Mars. The negative discharge, actually, if you go look at it, you can see the hole for the neck. The hole is like super, super obvious. And not only that, but you can see the two leg differentiations of the left and right leg of the discharge. This is where the material that was in there was sucked up and then settled along the electromagnetic field of the discharge.
So this apocalypse on Mars, what's its relationship to the Venus-Earth one? Just a similar...
They're the same event. They're the same event. In mythology, and I haven't read it too closely, but in the mythology of Medusa, Medusa is one of the three Gorgon sisters. The three Gorgon sisters. And so that would make Mars part of that story as well. But again, the story that we really look at that encompasses all the planets is called the Gigantomachy, the giant machine. The story of the Gigantomachy is a battle amongst the gods. It's about the failure of the machine. And so the surface features on Mars were formed in the exact same event as the surface features of the Earth, is the exact same event as the surface features of Venus, of Mercury. We see everything today where it is because of this event.
Whoa. Like, I still like the idea that it's remnants of an ancient civilization, but I'm open here. I'm always open.
There's a reason Stinky McDougall exists. Sometimes I have to say the most inconvenient things, and it is inconvenient when we spend a lot of time going, this could be a pyramid. Look, there's no question it has pyramidal shape to it. There's no question. But if you watch my video on this, which is, the Pyramids of Mars, Apocalypse 44, I think, up here on the pyramid in the upper left-hand corner, you'll see that I've circled two craters on the surface of the pyramid here. And the reason that those exist is those were part of the discharge. Not only did we have the discharge to the right, which is to the side, which is the negative crater hole, but there were two smaller ones that also occurred on the pyramid itself. And those are what formed those two circles. And I can actually show you, I talked about it earlier, but when the Honga Tonga volcano discharged, you can see a triangle in the clouds over the Pacific Ocean the day that the volcano discharged. And right as the sunset is coming across the triangle, on the right side of the triangle, opposite of the Honga Tonga, you get a discharge. Little white puff goes poof. And then as the sunset comes across, you get the Honga Tonga poof. Those two discharges are in the exact same location as they are on this pyramid.
Whoa.
And so the pyramid represents an electrical event coming down, and in the second phase, it discharged those two locations on the way up.
Yeah, I have my I Want to Believe poster up there for a reason. I want to believe all kinds of cool stuff. I'm open to a bunch of different ideas. And so I like Megan, enjoy the idea of an ancient lost civilization on Mars that seeded Earth through panspermia. But I'm also open to this, because it's just, what we're looking at is evidence. We're looking at repeating patterns here, that kind of thing. And, you got to keep an open mind, man. You got to.
Well, and if you want to go to the next slide, right? So when I closed up my series on this, I said, in order to really make this make sense, we have to take a minute and we have to talk about the big picture, which is how did the solar system form? And do we have any evidence in ancient mythology that talks about this? And so there's a video that I have sourced several times with this gentleman here on the lower left of the slide. He tells this TED Talk where he describes the Ute Native American tradition formation story for creation. Like, it's the story of how the earth came to be. And what he describes is God creating the sun and creating an anti-sun. He describes that one side poured out land, poured out earth. The other side poured out water. He describes how in the middle, God did this in order to create the planets. Again, we need to take these stories at face value. They're telling us the truth. They're telling us how the planets formed. And we see this layering effect of a planetary formation in the hills of the crests of Mars. You can see the layered striations just like you have on Earth. And as long as we can find a repeatable pattern, if we can find evidence in ancient tradition, then there's no reason not to take these people at face value, that the planets formed by a layering over a long period of time. And so when we look at these sites and we look at the evidence that's there's clearly been a massive discharge across the planet of Mars. The planet of Mars grew in size like the Earth through electrical coatings. At some point in the future, an apocalypse occurred, and it transformed the entire surface via electrical discharge. The Valles Marineris is a massive hole in the ground. Where'd all the rock go? Anybody? Bueller? Where'd the rock go? Anybody? And nobody wants to admit the obvious, which is the ground is missing. Andy Hall says it's as if the top of the planet was blown off. You know, it's funny, but we find a lot of remnant parts of the surface of Mars in the snow of Antarctica. Is it possible that Mars was located below the Earth, as I proposed?
So much going on in Antarctica.
There is so much going on in Antarctica, right? And so I did in that video was not only did I talk about the ancient Ute tradition for creation, but that in other religions and in other ancient scriptural texts, such as the Hindu story, the Hindus, that those stories talk about Mars having forests. And if we're trying to make the fewest assumption possible, then it would make more sense for there to have been wood that was petrified instantly found on Mars than a cylinder of an advanced civilization. Because there was an advanced civilization, wouldn't you assume we would find more than just a cylinder?
Very interesting.
Yeah. I'm still with the cylinder. I'm still like I'm at the I don't know point, but that's an interesting hypothesis. And you're when you're talking about making the least amount of assumptions possible, that your explanation would be it. So then, but Mars at the time was a blue planet with like
blue as could be. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And it could have had life, just not necessarily an advanced civilization.
I'm not against there having been an advanced civilization on the planet. I am not against that at all. But I want to make sure that when we look at what we're attributing to an advanced civilization isn't actually something else. And so, my last finding, which is the lower right-hand corner of this, was, really looking at, is there a three-sided pyramid on Mars? And once again, you have a giant basin in which you find this pyramid, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so your assumption is going to take us to the same one we did earlier with Gunung Padang, right? Which is, look, if I can tell you how the arc was formed, then Gunung Padang couldn't have been formed before that arc was formed. It had to have come after. So we can put a pin in its oldest date. It's the same thing here. Look, there's a whole bunch of dirt missing. There's a giant canyon here. And if the apocalypse formed the canyon, then you're saying that there was an apocalypse and then there was a civilization. Because there's absolutely no way that this pyramid exists before and after the apocalypse. The winds and the shapes and the arcs of the discharge are obvious in the sand. The bulb is here. You can go into the video and you can check it out. The lines of the bulb on the southern side aren't just sort of like you find on an induction bulb. The lines are exactly like you find on an induction bulb. And that means that there's an electrical purpose to the pyramid, and that is it formed as a grounds formed triangles. It's called a delta. Again, I'm using known electrical terminology. And if this was a ground to the discharge, then that would make sense why we have a pyramidal structure here.
And we'll put links to your videos regarding this down below so people can get a more in-depth look at it.
Thank you.
And all these slides will be available as well. So you can see them in the link below.
Do you want to go one more slide? Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
So I put this next one in as my favorite, and this is because when we talk about having encoded the event in mythology, we have not only encoded it in our mythology, but the mythology of Native Americans, the mythology of Afrikaners. The story was encoded globally, but amongst the Native Americans, they tell the story of the Thunderbird. And so once again, when we're talking about thunder, we already know that thunder is an electrical affectation, right? And when we look at the story of the Thunderbird, it has all the hallmarks of being part of the apocalypse itself. And so I found a story in Baraboo, Wisconsin, for the 100th anniversary of Devil's Lake, Wisconsin, that told the story called Blue Feather. And as you read the story, you suddenly realize that Blue Feather is the story of not only the Thunderbird, but the story of an electrical discharge that formed the Great Lakes themselves. And in several videos, I've talked about the head of Thunderbird, which is here you can see in the totem, being identifiable as all of the structures of Lake Superior, the lake up above it, which is called Lake Nipigon. And I'm here to correct my record. The orange beak goes out and comes down and forms Lake Brainerd in the middle of Minnesota. I did not know that till I went to Lake Brainerd and I went, holy cow, this is a giant lake. And I realized the only way for you to get a lake this large is for that material to be missing. And that's because the orange beak goes down is down because it's drawing up like a suction, like a straw, the material from the surface, eventually forming Lake Brainerd. If you go to the next slide, you can actually see where the parts of the diagram actually fit into the creation of the Great Lakes discharging up. And so what happened was that there was a cold cathode, it's called a cold cathode electrical discharge, and like a sail pulling up, right? So a wing doesn't push up, a wing gets pulled up. A sail doesn't get blown forward, a sail pulls you forward. On the surface of the earth, on the backside, opposite of the apocalypse, an electrical field pulled up the earth like a sail. The structure of that energy formed Lake Superior and all of the Great Lakes. But on Lake Superior, when the people looked eastward at its formation, it looked like the head of a giant bird. It was formed because there was a large arc of plasma that spanned the eastern half of North America. That plasma became the wings of the Thunderbird. The Thunderbird is a giant electromagnetic discharge that was seen by the survivors and immortalized in their legends. And you can see that the red dot at the very top of the ear tufts, that's what represents the formation of Lake Nipigon. The two lower red lobes form Nipigon Bay and Thunder Bay on the north side of Lake Superior. The mouth
Thunder Bay, there you go.
Arc, yeah.
From Canada.
Right? The eye represents Isle Royale. The eye represents Isle Royale. These names were often English or French, but they still kept the nature of these names for, antiquities purposes. And so the story of the Thunderbird is the formation of the Great Lakes. And that's probably one of my favorite videos that I put out there. You can find it. I think it's 15 or 16. But, we can then talk about not just the impact crater itself, but that eye on the Thunderbird is directly across from the eye we call the Tarim Basin. It is almost directly across from it. So these are all, contiguous electrical formations of the event.
I'm just imagining what it would have been like to be a human when fucking Venus smashes into Earth. So can I
Global
ask, yeah, global event. So would this replace, solar outburst, solar airburst, solar outburst, airburst, or comet or meteor, like in the Younger Dryas time?
This thesis replaces all of that conjecture. Not only that,
Okay.
but my research heavily suggests that there was no ice age either. And there are several reasons for that. I have a video on it that talks about the evidence for there being an immediate onset of a cold phase, which we are still technically in. And that's based on evidence found in super prodigiously frozen mammoth, right? These mammoths we find in the peninsulas of Russia, right? We find them encased in mud. And the freezing of the tissue seems such that they were froze almost instantly. How do you freeze a mammoth instantly?
Not easily.
No, not easily at all. And so if you take away the idea of an ice age, glaciers didn't form Lake Superior. That's the current thesis. Hey, how'd Lake Superior form? Glaciers. How'd the Mississippi? Glaciers. Billions of years. Billions. Glaciers. None of it was a glacier. There was no ice age. There was an electrical discharge, and it left the giant depressions and the rivers that we see today. There was an immediate cold phase that occurred right after it, and it froze these mammoth super prodigiously.
Ooh. All right.
So the immediate cold period would be the cold period suggested that happened after the Younger Dryas impact, or?
Yeah, the problem with calling it the Younger Dryas impact is because the Younger Dryas impact aligns itself according to ice core data. It says all of these things happened and then something changed. And so at this moment, the change must have been caused by an impact. And that's not what my research shows. My research shows that the data for the Younger Dryas, the ice core data, all this ice came down at the same time. It became hyper impacted at the end of the apocalypse. That's why we have these giant sheets of ice. It froze like a giant storm in layers, packing it down super prodigiously. That's why you have large. I mean, look, when we find these mammoths, we find them underneath, tens and hundreds and, sometimes 10, 20, 30 feet under ice. All that ice froze down at the same time. There were packing that came after that, but the moment that they point to the Younger Dryas is actually the vacillations during the apocalypse and then the final freezing period.
Yeah,
I just didn't have the data.
I just didn't have another word to frame it with, but you did answer my question. And so we talked about earlier the time, like when you think this happened, and you said you don't have like a solid date, but wouldn't it be around that time, just based off of stuff like Göbekli Tepe and also just it's like the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and the ancient civilizations, just one replaces the other, right? Because what other time could this have happened where humans were like on the planet, with the mythological thinking that they would have had to have to then encode this in structures and in, carvings and whatever and mythology all across the world, right? Would have had to been, sometime in the last, I don't know, 50,000 years or so, right?
You know, what you bring up are several excellent questions that, need serious study. But, much like my example of Ganun Padang, right? Could Ganun Padang have been created prior to the apocalypse? No. Ganun Padang cannot be any older than the apocalypse. Could the pyramids be any older than the apocalypse? No. No, they could not be any older than the apocalypse. The Nile was formed in the apocalypse.
Okay.
Could the structure at Göbekli Tepe be older than the apocalypse? No. None of these. The entire surface of the earth was terraformed in the apocalypse. Every square inch was changed. Nothing is older than the apocalypse in terms of structures. And once again, I don't know why we don't listen to the Jewish calendar. They say it happened 5,700 years ago. Right? I mean, we have a stele sitting in front of the paws of the Great Sphinx. The dates of the Old Testament seem to line up at least around 4 to 3,000 BC, that suddenly you have this advanced kingdom out of nowhere. Literally out of nowhere. Not only does it come out of nowhere, they stick a giant piece of granite in front and says, year 1 of the first spring of the first year. They say it's the first year. Why do we not take that for face value? Why do we not say, hey, when they say this was the very first year, is it possible they mean the actual first year for everything?
Whoa.
It's possible.
Then that means that the age of the Sphinx, it means the age of Göbekli Tepe, it means the age of Ganun Padang, it means the age of Nan Madol, it means the age of all of these megalithic sites should be the same, which is at the end of the apocalypse. For some reason, in some way, all of these sites manifested at the same time. And that's not me. Look, when we look at religion says, for example, the Old Testament says creation took 7 days. How many days did it take to create the temple at Kailash? 7 days. You look at temples.
I think Ganun Padang was like supposed to be built in 7 days or something. A king had to build it in 7 days.
Some of these places only say they took a day, right? Stonehenge is said to have been created in a single day, in a single night, that the devil not only quarried, transport, but placed all of the stones in a single swift move. Where else do you get that kind of energy except in the apocalypse? And where else do you get the same time frames?
How would the apocalypse make a great pyramid? That's not what you're saying?
That's a great question. That is a great question. And the answer may not be as intuitive as we think, because we don't have a real concept around what the beginning of time really meant. Right? So, for example, if you look at the ancient Australian Aboriginal mythology about creation, they talk about there being a time before creation, but that time is known as the dream time, as if it wasn't an actually real time. That the definition of time and reality changed in creation. Suddenly we start talking about it being in the year of the Lord. Why the change? Why
Lots
the change?
to chew on tonight.
Right.
I'm going to be
and so the question then becomes, in some way, did we create an advanced technology and an advanced civilization that we have forgotten about? Or did someone create a machine that we found, which is what the Aztecs say, right? What I find, however, again, over and over and over, is that the remnants of all of the technology, the stories about all of the technology, the stories about how these machines worked. It's encoded in all the local religions and mythologies. All of it was kept because it was important. Clearly, somebody created these sites. Clearly, somebody occupied these sites. Those two may not have been the same characters. They may not have been the same characters. And you say, well, what do you mean, Bob? Haven't we heard over and over again that UFOs have been landed and seem to be in perfectly good working order?
Mm-hmm.
Do we not have evidence of someone else giving us technology we don't understand?
Always.
Do we not already have that model?
We do.
That not already was recorded. Why do you think that that didn't occur at the end of the apocalypse? Is it possible that in order for humanity to kickstart, in order for us to survive, after all the destruction, there had to be a single major event of construction? And in science, they call it negative entropy. So you had all of this entropy created in the creation, and at the last minute, it was counterbalanced by negative entropy, the creation of these megalithic sites in order to kickstart civilization. Possible? I don't have a better theory just yet. That's what I think happened.
In this theory of yours, there was no human civilization before that date?
That's not
Like there would have been nothing before that?
Stonehenge said to be built by the devil. Several of these sites seem to be built. The story of Gunung Padang is that it was built by King Siliwangi. Why does that have to be a corporeal human being? Why can it not be a definition of a negative entropy force that creates these things naturally? Look, inductance is a predictable thing. Inductance as a field of energy of magnetism is a predictable thing. Why can these same predictable forces not exist at a highly structured level as well? That's the argument that I'm making.
Very interesting. Ooh.
Well, it definitely would change everything, that's for sure. And I appreciate, when you say, hey, that question requires like a bunch more research, because there's a lot more that needs to go into this in order to answer people's questions, right? And so that makes me want to ask what is the next area of research? What do you want to do on your show? How do you because it sounds like you need other people to work on this with you, right? People who are specialized in certain areas.
So, in any research, one of the things that's important is replicability. So if somebody else can't replicate my findings, that generally invalidates the findings. But what I would argue is that one of the challenges of my channel is people know so little about electrical engineering and the electrical force that it's almost foreign, right? It's fun to talk about popular conjecture and ideas, but none of the science behind some of the theories that are out there, despite how good they really are, have any replicability. You could say that the pyramids created ammonia. I don't have a problem with that thesis, but you have to explain how the rest of the machine worked in order for us to get there. And if you can, then we have a replicable model for the machine. These are all that I'm suggesting. I am suggesting that the next step is for us to start considering an electric universe answer, to start accepting an electric universe catastrophism model, to start accepting an electric universe megalithic site structure, that when you do and you start applying these things, for example, I did a video on the Sphinx, everybody wants to attribute the erosion around the Sphinx to water. The exact same erosion occurs through electrical sputtering.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Why would we not look at this from an electromagnetic standpoint? Because if we look at it from an electrical sputtering standpoint, we suddenly realize we have an origin for the electromagnetic pulses that were powering the pyramids themselves. Suddenly we can ask ourselves, are the pyramids the only story, or is the delta, the triangle of the Nile Delta, part of a large agricultural machine that is anchored by the pyramids? Suddenly we get a much different picture, because it seems that agriculture was very much what these things were about. We get that with the stories of Rapa Nui. The mythology around Rapa Nui says that King Hotumatua came to Rapa Nui and created a machine to improve the growth of the crops and the chickens. That's what the story says. Once again,
Right.
why do we not take these stories at face value? There was a machine. The machine helped make the crops grow and the chickens to grow, to grow faster. If it was helping the chickens to grow better, what's not to say that it helped the health of the people as well? And if it was true that it was improving the health of the people in Rapa Nui, did it help the people who lived within the delta created by the pyramids in the Nile Delta? These machines were much bigger than just the Great Pyramid. The machine that the Great Pyramids structurally supported is the entire delta and all the farms. They needed food. And if you could create a machine to literally make your food regrow, I mean, they used, look, what kind of crops did they find on Rapa Nui? They found potatoes, sweet potatoes. They found things that would just regrow themselves. You just got to leave a little bit in the ground, and what happens? Just regrows. How's that for a garden? Unlimited food supply. You plant it once, and it just regrows.
Yeah, it just spreads its seed.
Yes, and so if that's what they were doing on Rapa Nui with the triangular island delta, why would they not have been doing that in Egypt with the Nile Delta? I mean, those are just a giant farmland to begin with, and it's still farmland today.
Wow.
This is a lot to think about. The electric universe is something that is on the outskirts of like mainstream cosmology and planetary formation and stuff like that. But it seems to explain a lot of things that aren't explained well by conventional models. And is the electric universe theory like even taught in universities at all, or is anyone even exploring that in universities?
I don't know if anyone is doing any curricular work on the electric universe. I do know that Ben Davidson of the Space Weather News, I do know that his Weatherman's Guide to the Sun, of which I have, I think this is the 3rd edition. Got it signed. I do know that this is being taught in several colleges. He talks about that this is being taught. And Ben begins with an electric universe, preview of it, of what's going on. And so, there are forays into the electric universe that are out there. And I think that we're going to continue to see, as it answers more and more questions, we're going to see its popularity as a rubric increase significantly. And, really, I mean, that's my work really came down to just that. Somebody said, hey, there are electrical structures in the surface of the earth from this apocalypse. And I mean, I just started looking around, and you'd be surprised what you find. I mean, I have a short out there on the circles. There are 10 near perfect circles in the surface of the earth. These weren't created in separate events. These were all created in the same event, which is why you get such perfect circularity in them.
Interesting. And were you saying they're like plasma? They're not They're not like
They're
comets.
circular
or...
because they represent junctures or junctions of plasma between the surface of the Earth and the sky during the
Okay.
apocalypse. And so some of these, some of these are, for example, the Recot structure. Andrew Hall did an absolutely seminal video called the Keystone Pattern. And in his video on the Keystone Pattern, he defines perfectly the electrical characteristics of the Recot structure. He defines the wind patterns and the electrical updraft and downdrafts created, which created this structure. And if we are going to take any definition of this structure seriously, you have to have a scientific, repeatable example of how these things formed. And his does. Anybody who spends even one moment longer saying that this is the remnants of Atlantis are just wasting your time. The Recot structure was formed in electrical discharge. That's not me. That's Andrew Hall and an electric universe perspective on how these structures get formed. Now, because of the great job that Andrew did on the Keystone Pattern and on the Recot structure, I will tell you that if you go to the middle of the Keystone structure, or the middle of the Recot structure, go right to the dead center on Google Earth, put a dot down, and then you follow that line at 138 degrees, you are going to find yourself right dead center of the Orango Basin in Africa. And you will come into it right along this tree trunk line like it's an arrow. All of these are formed in the apocalypse. The structures of Africa are formed in the discharge, one side being green and one side being brown. One side being the anode that got toasted, and one side being the cathode that remained a jungle, right? You get this
but Robert, it's really fun to think about Atlantis as the reshot structure.
I know.
All right.
It is. It's fun. Popular conjecture is fun, but that's one of the things about my channel. I'm not here for popular conjecture. I'm not here to try and watch a video that makes, clickbait a thing over popular ideas like, hey, the Recot structure it's Atlantis. It's not Atlantis. It's an electrical discharge site. It's more fun to talk about science.
With AI and things like this these days that can help us sort of play out these scenarios, could you create like a model of Earth and a model of Venus and see if hitting them together would create those discharges in those locations? Like, is this something we could sort of test out and make?
It is, and I thought about getting a couple of balloons in order to diagram this. But what you have to look at is that Venus has a C shape, and that C shape comes from the bottom, like this. I don't know if I'm going to illustrate this well, like this. And it's going into the Earth, which has one like this. The two halves are actually dead opposite each other in that alignment, like perfectly aligned. And that's just the nature of the electrical, hookups. I agree. As AI improves, I have attempted to get AI to do this. I had my friend Daniel take a shot at it as well. Neither of us could get AI to properly illustrate this because, to begin with, you have to explain to it, you have to have a proto-planet, Earth. You can't start with all the surface formations you see today. The Earth was mostly shallow oceans and swamps. It wasn't, you didn't have giant mountains like we have today. All the mountains and all the rivers were formed in the apocalypse.
Okay.
So we don't have like what the Earth, well, you'd have to explain to AI exactly what the Earth looked like as a proto-Earth in order for it to do it right. So it needs to be sort of a reverse engineering process of what Earth looked like before you could tell AI what to do in order to predict this model. I wonder if there's a way to make AI reverse engineer it for you.
More complicated than I was initially thinking. Yeah.
And I wish there were. There are. I've heard folks in other podcasts and other videos talk about this. that the proto-Earth description is one of shallow oceans and mostly swamps. When you look at the stories, or excuse me, when you look at the general habitat of the dinosaurs, that's really what it sort of supports. And in particular, when you look at the Brontosaurus, the shallow ocean supports, and the swamps supports the Brontosaurus because half their weight can be underwater, and the buoyancy would make them, it would make it much easier for them to live in a swampy, just offshore environment.
Interesting.
So I don't have a problem with, any of these, concepts of a shallow oceans and swampy surface of all three planets for that matter. I think we need more research, but, recently I went to, Joshua Tree, California. And, when you go to the forest,
one of my favorite places. Yeah,
it's really cool. When you go up there and you stop at the visitor center, one of the things that's very interesting to find out is that they have never found a single dinosaur bone anywhere in Joshua Tree. Anywhere. Not one.
Interesting.
Yeah. But you also go 3,000 or 4,000 feet into the air when you go into the high desert.
Okay.
Is it possible that we can find out what the original surface of the planet looked like if we get down to the bottom of the mountain? Like literally dig a hole straight down, and you should find the original environment that was there prior to the apocalypse.
Whoa.
And it may have dinosaurs. Yeah.
Get the drills out. Let's go.
you'd have to do that with every mountain, right?
You'd have to do it with every mountain. The question is, where did the material come from that formed the Sierra Mountains, right? And the mountains actually from all the way down in Mexico up through Alaska, right? All of that is another example of material from another planet, as best I can tell. I don't know where all the material comes from. But it seems odd to me that I have an entire segment of the planet where you can't find a single dinosaur bone.
There's other segments, I'm sure. There's a lot to think about. It'll be interesting to see what the lost ancient history community thinks about this. But that's the idea behind our show, is like bringing new ideas to the table and not just running with one way to think about things, and then owning it like it's your best friend or something when it gets attacked. But this blows my mind. I'm going to have to do some shrooms and imagine this or something later next week. I'm going to ask one more time because we'll start wrapping up here. But what's your next video that you're going to make? Do you have anything in mind?
I usually make my videos when the spirit moves me. I have a couple things that I'm working on. I'm going to be releasing. Actually, I take that back. I do have a release coming up. I've written an original song called "It's Not Just a Conspiracy to Me." It's about the UFO. It's about the cover-up of the UFO phenomenon, and how it's interesting that we happen to be going to war just as the whole phenomenon is coming out, and it's sort of backfilled with some popular speakers on the subject. And it's more of an art project for me than anything, but that'll be coming out on the 14th. And other than that, I just finished my video series on Mars, and although I'm tempted to keep going because it's just so many things there you can talk about, I think I'm going to circle back to the Earth and Venus, and I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to do next, but I'm getting itchy about some mythology that I really want to kind of attack. And
Cool.
What's interesting and what's really unique is that along the way, anytime I've said, hey, should I look at this next piece of this, it all seems to come together and fit. And so it's very possible the next video could also be on the UFO phenomenon, because there are so many connections between human consciousness, the question of creation, and the current state we find ourselves, that got me the moniker of Stinky McDougall.
Well, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about the UFO phenomenon lately too. I actually made a song, a gangster rap song called I forget what it's called, but it's on the exact same topic about how this not just a conspiracy theory. And I'm looking forward to that. Where can we find that? On the 14th?
That'll be on my YouTube channel, Dr. Stinky McDougall's Lab.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yep.
And maybe after the crew watches this, we could bring you on Mars Disclosure Live and see how you react to some of the stuff.
Caught up a bit.
Well,
I don't
because
look. I don't want to be a spoiler, but Stinky.
it's not about being a spoiler to me. It's like I think everyone would want, because the panel all gives their own opinion, right?
Yeah.
And so you could give your own opinion about the structures we're looking at too, and the different anomalies as well. I
Absolutely. And until somebody else comes up with another, I don't need to get caught up in the question of pareidolia. If you can give me other reasons that you can point to that are supported for any of the other structures on the planet, look, I'm just giving you my thesis on what my research says. Either someone else will replicate it, improve it, and go further, or completely debunk it. But that's the point of presenting an idea. The reason my channel is a lab, the reason it's Dr. Stinky McDougall's Lab, is these are my thought exercises on what's going on. How do you pull a full picture together of where we are and what's going on, Bob? Well, let me show you my lab work. Here is, and my work's changed over the years. When I first started, I had no idea we dealt with a crustal expansion. And so if you watch my earlier videos, they don't recognize the expansion of the crust yet. In fact, because of that, some parts of those theories are incorrect. I had not come to the conclusion that the moon was formed in the apocalypse at that point, in the early parts of the video. So none of my information and models show that theory. But, if you look at the formation of the moon and the fact that they brought home petrified wood from the moon, suddenly you go, wait a minute, what do you mean they found petrified wood on the moon? Yeah, they found petrified wood on the moon. They also found too much carbon to explain from any other formation event. They also don't know where all the water came from. Well,
the petrified wood is often used to debunk the moon landing altogether.
That never landed. Yeah, it's actually
right,
the thing
and that it was like
not only we landed there, but it proves that the moon was formed from the surface of the Earth. Right? It's all of a sudden you go from it being one thing into being lots of other things as well.
I think that's a good place to drop off. Robert Burke, Dr. Stinky, aka Dr. Stinky McDougall. The entire slideshow will be down below, plus links to some of the videos he was talking about. I'm hoping once I post this, we can get some, I don't know if conjecture is the right word, but some other thoughts on it as well. And I'm really interested to see how the Lost Ancient Civilization community reacts to it. And I really appreciate your time and energy on this. What about you, Megan?
Yeah, I feel like I have some homework. I got lots of your videos to watch now. So many cool ones you've called out, especially the one on Indonesia, on Gunung Padang. Yeah. So can't wait to get in on that. Thank you for your time today. It was really interesting. You really stretched my brain this morning in an exciting way.
Well, good. And I do appreciate you guys having me on the show. It's always nice to talk about different theories and to, have someone else take a look at the ideas and really, make their own decision. Either it's scientifically supported or it's not. If it's not scientific, then it's not supported.
Totally.
Perfect.
Thank you.
What's up, humans? If you're enjoying this content, please take a moment to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss a thing. Megan and I are very grateful for all of your support, so thanks for joining the multiverse.